Ravage.
An ending today to a very disturbing case. A woman and her 2 teenage children pleaded guilty in the connection with the murder of her boyfriend, who was their father. His body was concealed in the freezer of the family's home for 2 years. Amanda Lamb takes us through the emotional testimony on how and why both sides said it happened.
Prosecutors say Wendy Green masterminded the murder of her longtime boyfriend, David Green Jr., and enlisted her 15-year-old pregnant daughter and her 13-year-old son to help.
And Wendy indicated that they had to kill David Jr., that if they didn't kill him, he was going to kill her.
Prosecutor Jason Waller says Wendy Green convinced her son to hit his father over the head while he slept.
So he hit his father again with the hammer, at that time crushing his skull.
But David Green didn't die right away. He suffered for 7 hours.
Crawling around on the floor, asking for help from her.
Prosecutors say the 3 then dragged Green's body to the basement with a dog leash and hid it in a freezer. Wendy Green abandoned the children in the home, at which time Waller says David Green III tried to cut off his father's limbs and succeeded in decapitating him.
David Green III made the regrettable decision to mutilate his father's body.
Investigators found David Green's body almost 2 years later, after other family members reported him missing. Attorneys for the children say they were forced into the crime by their mother.
The mother was a puppet master. She was telling these kids what to do, and they were doing it.
Because his mother has taken over his will, taken over his mind.
The result, a tragedy which has scarred so many lives, is putting Wendy Green and her children behind bars for many years. Amanda Lamb, WRAL News, Raleigh.
Wendy Green pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, was sentenced up to 46 years in prison. The children cooperated with investigators. David Green was sentenced to a maximum of 26 years. His sister Alexis, who pleaded guilty to lesser charges, a maximum of 8.
Hello world, welcome to my channel Ravage. I am your host Ravage, that being an infinite souls of knowledge or infinite source of knowledge, which is my perspective of what it is being human. I will be covering topics such as local true crime, the paranormal, life after death, problems in our community, secret societies, shadow governments, so-called conspiracies, aliens, and much more interesting topics in the future. First and foremost, I would like to pay condolences to the victim in this unfortunate situation, David Rubin Green Jr. I wish the family, those close, and his loved ones more life and happiness to come.
Today's episode takes place in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the story of David Green, his sister Alexis, mother Wendy, and the unfortunate event that took place on that fateful night. I'm going to be telling this case based off the factual case files and also based off of my personal testimony, as I was a friend of David's at the time this unfortunate incident occurred. Now, coming up, I'm going to be showing you a few spots that we used to hang out. This is the homie Trap spot where he used to stay at, and this is over where we was hanging out at when we first met David. He was walking up the street. I guess he smelled us smoking on that good Zai. Caught his attention and he walked up. And I used to stay in Governor's Point around this time. And we also used to hang out over by the path. And this was probably summertime after my freshman year. And I went to Leesville, 2008, 2012. I never met David's mother or his father, but when I first met David, I didn't know his father was considered missing at the time. As David would come around more often, eventually I was introduced to his sister, and I found out that his sister was dating a guy named JR that I knew from riding the school bus with, most likely my freshman year. I knew him from seeing him on the school bus. Hanging around David, he didn't seem like a bad guy, just a regular teenager trying to have fun, you know, just hanging out with friends, smoking, playing a game. Although looking back at it, I can admit there was a few times that, you know what I'm saying, like after he left from hanging around us, you know what I'm saying, the guys would admit having a strange vibe around him, as if he was paranoid, looking over his shoulder 24/7 type of vibes. Other than that, he didn't seem like a dangerous type of person. Being that I never met his parents, I don't know anything that happened personally in his household or how he truly felt towards his father. Although there was one night I hung around David after he invited me to his house to chill with his sister and one of her friends. We hung out on the back porch, mostly, you know what I'm saying, chilling with the ladies. And after a few conversations, me and David went in back in the house. I walked down the same hallway his father took his last moments. Down inside the basement was pretty much a man cave. You know what I'm saying? You had like green carpet, boxing equipment. You had like the Xbox down there, and it was a dingy, horrid looking white deep freezer that was behind the staircase in the corner. So I'm pretty sure I was in the same room with the dead body. I just didn't know it at the time. All while me and David just chilling, playing the game, which makes this story even more gruesome. David's father seemed like a man of morals and beliefs, trying to raise his family the best way he knew. If he was strict, it didn't seem like anything unreasonable. What am I speaking about? It's not wanting daughters in any sexual relationship before marriage, especially in high school. It's a real man's nightmare having to deal with a situation so sensitive in nature. So I commend him on standing firm on his beliefs. So Alexis and JR hooked up irresponsibly without any safety in mind, causing an unplanned teenage pregnancy. The teenage couple tried to keep it a secret until they could get rid of the baby. The rumor spread across the schools in the neighborhood like a California wildfire. So a seed was planted out of wedlock that nobody wanted, which some would consider a curse in itself. So over time, somehow, David's father found out his daughter was pregnant in high school by some local high school rapper. I'm sure his heart felt as if it dropped. That night, he confronted his whole family to set the record straight, but the words he used that night scared David to his core, making him believe it wasn't a threat, but a promise. The night of 18 January 2009, an argument between the father and the mother about a possibility that Alexis was pregnant. During the argument, the father threatened the mother, stating that he would kill her and bury her in the backyard if he found out his daughter was pregnant. The father demanded that the mother take his daughter to see a doctor the following morning to determine if she was pregnant. After the father went to bed that evening, a conversation occurred between the mother, Alexis, and David. During this conversation, David learned that his sister was in fact pregnant. Wendy then told David that she believed his father would kill her and asked David to kill his father. The mother had similar statements that the father needed to be killed on prior occasions when she was angry with the father. On this occasion, Wendy suggested David kill his father with a sword while the father was asleep, and then place the body in the basement freezer. The mother removed the sword from the father's closet and gave the defendant the sword to put in his bedroom. David felt that his mother and sister were pressuring him to kill his father, and he believed his father would carry through with his threat. The three then went to bed with the understanding that David would kill his father. The following morning, on 19 January 2009, Wendy woke up David around 8:30 a.m. and asked if he was ready. David told Wendy he did not want to kill his father. David then had a conversation with his mother, during which Wendy cried, asking David if he loved her, offering him money to kill his father, and implored him to carry out the act. The father was asleep in his bed. At the prompting of Wendy, David went into his father's bedroom with the sword, but he decided he could not kill his father with the sword, so he left the bedroom. At this moment, he went to obtain grudge hammer and returned to his father's bedroom. David again left the bedroom, replacing the first hammer with a nail hammer he retrieved from the kitchen. David then returned to his father's bedroom for a third time, where he then struck his father in the head with the hammer. The mother stood at the bedroom doorway, watching the defendant as he struck his father. The first blow did not incapacitate his father, so the defendant, David, struck his father again with the hammer, thereby incapacitating her. David stated that the second blow cracked open his father's skull, causing blood to splatter on his face. David then took the hammer and went into the bedroom where he washed his face and the hammer. His father did not immediately die as a result of the blows. The father was able to eventually get up out of bed, and he walked around the house for approximately 4 to 6 hours in a confused state, falling down and asking for help. During this time, the family did not offer the father any assistance. The defendant stated his father was bleeding a lot and his brain was falling out. David checked his father's pulse every 30 minutes to see if he was still alive. The mother asked David to strike the father again, but he refused to do so. Later in the afternoon, around 3 to 4 o'clock p.m., he passed away. Wendy then decided to place the father's body in the basement freezer. At the instruction of his mother, David wrapped his father's body in a sheet, placed the trash bag over his father's head because it was leaking fluid, taped his father's body, and brought the father's body downstairs to the basement area. David came up with the plan of how to place his father's body inside the freezer, and the three then placed his body in the freezer. The three then went to spend the night in the hotel, and on the following morning, the three purchased cleaning supplies, cleaned the house, and shampooed the carpet. The family then continued to live in the house for a year until the following January, when the mother abandoned David and his sister to live in the house alone. In February 2010, David decided to cut up his father's body to dispose of it, and he asked a friend to help. David first tried to cut off his father's legs with the axe, but he was unable to do so because the body was so frozen. David's friend then used the axe to cut off his father's head. Now, this is interesting right here because this is pretty much a fourth party involved in this crime. It's saying David's friend because it's the three of them, and he said he asked a friend. I ain't talking about myself. Now, I did know this nigga, but he asked a friend to help him in disposing the body pretty much. But he probably didn't give his name up to the police and all that shit. So, it's extra work they got to do. But that's interesting. Anyway, so somebody else was probably involved in this crime. The defendant's friend then used the axe to cut off father's head. After the father's head was removed, David removed a necklace from his father's body and later had a friend pawn it for money. At some point, David also mutilated the body with motorized hedge trimmers. David did not call the police at any point because he did not want to see his mother go to jail. Eventually, the father's brother began questioning where the father was and called Wake County Sheriff's Office. The power was cut off to the railroad residence in August 2010, at which sometime investigators went into the home and discovered his father's mutilated body in the basement freezer. Alexis informed the officers who the responsible parties were, and David was located in Minnesota and brought back to Carolina. David cooperated with the investigation and gave a statement to law enforcement officers.
This is David Green III. He entered a plea to second-degree murder in file 10 CRS 18846. that was again second-degree murder, and to 10 CRS 18847 to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. That plea was heard in front of the Honorable Judge Howard Manning Jr. on August 25th, 2011. At that time, the state indicated that judgment requested that judgment be continued until the resolution of the Wendy Green and Alexis Green matters. As those matters have now been resolved, the state would ask to pray judgment on these matters at this time, if I may approach with the files. Your Honor, as this is the third matter, I'm not going to, and there's already been a factual basis stipulated too, I believe, in the prior hearing. I'll go directly to sentencing if that's appropriate in the court. Your Honor, well, first of all, Mr. Brandon has a copy of this CD interview, but I would ask to approach and introduce State's Exhibit 1 for the court file. It's a copy of David Green III's proffer interview that he gave to us a couple of months ago. A couple of weeks ago at this point. Okay. Your Honor, again, this is a case in which I know Mr. Brandon's going to stand up and ask that you mitigate the sentence, and I certainly respect that and understand him doing so. What I will say is that we've taken that into account. I understand that at the time of this murder, David Green III was 13 years of age. I understand that, and based on the theory of the case, he did it at his mom's wishes. Again, as Mr. Ansley said, he was a pawn in what she wanted to have done that morning. The problem that we have in this case is that Mr. Green, or David Green III, was 13 years old at the time. He was capable of making decisions. How do we know that he was capable of making decisions? The thing that bothers me the worst about what he did is he went into that room 3 times. He went in there with a sword, and he decided that he couldn't do it with a sword. He went back out, and he went and looked for what he called a grudge hammer, which I described earlier as a metal cylinder with a wooden handle. Walked out of that room again, and then finally went back in with a nail hammer. And at that time, he struck his father not once, but twice. The first time, it didn't kill him. The second time didn't kill him, but it was the lethal blow. And then they let his father walk around that house for hours. And then, at his mother's request, they put the body in the freezer. But as Mr. Green will tell you, he made the decision on how to do it, helped out tremendously. Put the body on the sheet, duct taped the hands, and took him back down and drug him down, then put him in that freezer. He left him there, and his mom's idea was to dispose of the body at a later time. And again, Mr. Green made a regrettable decision in deciding that he had to man up and do it himself. And in February of 2010, David Green III made the regrettable decision to mutilate his father's body. At first, he went down with an axe and tried to cut the legs off. And it's that point where there's some marks made on David Jr.'s knees. And at that point, he was so thoroughly frozen that they couldn't get his legs cut off with an axe. They also tried and successfully removed David Green Jr.'s head using an axe. They also used a knife, and they also tried to use hedge trimmers, motorized hedge trimmers. This is a decision that he made while his mom was not there. And it's a terrible, terrible decision. After that, he continued to leave his father in the freezer when his mom never came back to help him out. He stayed, and he ended up going to Minnesota and finally came back, and similar to Alexis, gave a story that it was all Wendy Green, but then finally, after learning what the situation was, admitted to his full involvement, and that's the CD you'll see there. he was forthcoming. I will say he was forthcoming on that interview. And he implicated himself. It doesn't change the fact that he struck his father in the head twice with a hammer. And he made the decision to do that. Your Honor, I'm not going to ask that you give him as much time as you did Wendy or Miss Green, because that's not the theory of the case. And again, we recognize that his mother was the one pushing the buttons here. But I would ask that you find that the aggravating factors outweigh all the mitigating factors in this case. And I know there are a lot of them. I know there are, and I know Mr. Brand's going to do a good job telling you about all of them. But he is the one that made the decision to do this, and he did it. That one aggravating factor outweighs everything else he did. His father was laying there helplessly in his bed. And David Green III took his father's life. He took him from Mr. Avery. He took him from Miss Zeddy. Again, there's some talk of abuse, but in talking with people at David's school, they didn't see any outward signs of abuse. They saw a young kid who was a fun-loving teenager who didn't like coming to school, but he never complained of abuse to them, and I haven't seen any records that he was abused. It's a tough situation, I know it is, but he also committed a murder that if he was older than he is, and if his mother hadn't been involved, it's a first-degree case, no question. For those reasons, I'd ask that you sentence David Green III at the bottom of the aggravated range on both sentences and run those consecutively as pointed out in the plea transcript. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Judge, David's been in one form of custody or another since October 13th of 2010. By my count, that's 324 days as of today. I just put that out for the clerk. Judge, this is Wendy Green's show. I think the state's been real forthcoming and candid about that. David had as much free will involved in this case as the hammer did. When his mother wrapped herself around David, sent David with a hammer to kill her father, his father, her husband. That's all Wendy Green. This is just an inanimate object at that point in time. That was my hope when you having a chance to digest Dr. Artigue's letter. She talks about emotional incest, where one of the parents takes over the child and uses the child inappropriately. That's certainly what has happened here. The most fundamental rule of criminal law is you have to have a bad act coupled with a bad mind. They have to both be there. Judge, in this case, what you have is a bad act, but you have somebody else's mind. You don't have David's mind engaged because his mother has taken over his will, taken over his mind with this emotional incest concept to use him to do something she could not do herself. Judge, right now, David is in DHS custody. His social worker is present in the courtroom just in case she was needed. The one thing I do want to add, because it hasn't been brought out yet, I'm not going to go over the facts. We've spent the whole morning here doing them. But everybody seems interested in the fact that David Jr. unfortunately lived for such a long time wandering about the house confused. I asked David about that, and he said, from his point of view, you have to understand, I thought my father was Superman. I thought my father couldn't be hurt or killed. When I struck my father and a few moments later he got out of bed, all I could think to do was go and hide. I didn't know what to do. He's 13 years old. What's the hardest thing your mother asked you to do when you were 13? Do your homework? Cut the lawn? Not kill somebody. Certainly not kill your own father. Judge, I really think that the appropriate thing to do in this case is to look at that extraordinary mitigation argument and apply it to these cases. What David needs is to be in school, and much like his sister, you heard from Mr. Ansley, David has thrived in the juvenile detention center. I mean, he goes to school every day. He plays on the football team. He's a good kid. Everybody talks well about him, want to go down there to see him. I think you should apply the extraordinary mitigation argument. You should find both these cases appropriate for the extraordinary mitigation. Put David on a probationary sentence, but let's get him in school, and let's get started on some type of therapeutic treatment where he can finally, we haven't been able to do this yet, address what did happen to him in his life and not let his mother, with all the damage she's done so far, steal the rest of his life from him, too. Thank you.
In 10 CRS 18846, the defendant having previously pled guilty to second-degree murder, Class B2 felony, and he is a level 1 for sentencing purposes. It's under the old chart. All right. Court finds the existence of, beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defendant has stipulated to the existence of aggravating factor number 15. The defendant took advantage of a position of trust or confidence to commit the offense. Court finds the existence of mitigating factors number 1, A, B, and C, and the state has stipulated to those, to that, and to mitigating factor number 15, that the defendant has accepted responsibility for his conduct. Court also finds the existing mitigating factor number 4A, that the defendant's age or immaturity at the time of the commission of the offense significantly reduced his culpability. Court finds that the mitigating factors and the aggravating factors balance one another out. Order that Mr. Green be sentenced in the presumptive range. Court orders that Mr. Green be sentenced to a minimum term of 140 months, a maximum of 177 months in the North Carolina Department of Corrections. Court recommends a complete psychological evaluation and the provision of appropriate treatment based upon that evaluation. Court further recommends the provision of appropriate educational and vocational services to Mr. Green that are appropriate to his age and circumstance. Court further orders that he be housed in a facility that is as appropriate as there is in the Department of Corrections for a person of his age. In 10 CRS 18847, court makes the same findings in mitigation and aggravation. However, in that case, court finds that the mitigating factors outweigh any factors in aggravation, and the court orders that Mr. Green be sentenced to a minimum of 109 and the maximum of 140 months in the Department of Corrections to run at the expiration of the sentence imposed in the first case. The same recommendations for his confinement.
Are you denying my motion for extraordinary mitigation?
Yes.
I would ask to appeal that issue.
All right. Certainly. In my discretion, that motion is